So yeah, I'll do a very quick introduction of this webinar, and then I'll hand it over to Mike. First of all, thank you very much for everyone for joining this DSI webinar today. And unfortunately, we couldn't do it last time as it was scheduled on 30th of October. Sorry about that. Now today, with us is like we're Mr. Miss Dr. Mark Dietrich is going to present the Sage data space. It's a Grindel data space, and Mark is the advisor of EGI, and also he is expert in the different and various technologies. He has years of experience in data interoperability, governance, and he has been working with Grindel and Sage very closely over the last few years. So today we are going to basically learn from Mark about the Grindel data spaces. Mark, to you. And thanks, Mark, for joining with us today.
Thanks very much, Rafiq, and to everybody joining us. I'm sorry we weren't able to do the presentation as originally scheduled. I had a computer problem. It died, so I had no way of making the presentation. So I appreciate people's flexibility. So I'm the technical coordinator of SAGE, which is the Common European Data Space for the Green Deal Action Plan of the European Union. And it is one of the, I don't know, different times it was different numbers, but I think the number now is 14 common European data spaces that is contemplated or described by the European Strategy for Data from 2020. Remember that? February of 2020. That was 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. So we've come a long way, but we also haven't come quite as far as I think we had hoped. So I'm going to try to lay this out for you, what we're doing, what the impact of that might be, or the sort of what the relevance of it all might be to practitioners in different domains, and particularly in Ireland, because this is the community that's here. And I am presenting, so I won't be able to see your questions, but I've asked Carmel to alert me to anything urgent, but I'm happy to take questions at the end. But let's try to move on. Lots to cover here. Okay, there we go. So, um, how will Sage improve sustainability is a key question. And for those of you who've been in this world of data sharing for a while, you'll recognize some of the pictures on this page. They're partly taken from the Open Data Institute from 2020. The block on the left closed, and the block on the right sort of blue and open. Internal access, named access, group-based access, public access, and anyone. This is not a new concept. It's been in the wind for well over 5 years. Our objective is to enable data to be shared and discovered and moved and combined across defined groups of users. And you'll see in this spectrum this thing called group-based access, which many of you will know, for example, in academia as the virtual organization, VO-based access. It's really the same concept broadened to allow for more data sovereignty or enterprise sovereignty, personal sovereignty with the data that they are responsible for. Um, it also enables value to be returned to the participants in these groups. So by defining a group, you allow the creation of value within the group, and that value to be made available within the group, and then perhaps charged or made for, offered for a fee outside. So you create money value, and you also create a return to the people who participate. And as I said a moment ago, participants control the extent to which their data is shared in a data space, so that's entirely under their control. And generally, data spaces do not usually store or process data. So the thing, just to conclude, is we're adding one piece in the data space world, this attribute-based access. This wasn't originally in the Open Data Institute presentation, but that's essentially what we're creating as an additional capability. We will start in the Green Deal data space with data sharing groups to enable both named access and group-based access. and then we will extend it with rules-based, attribute-based access control to allow for broader data sharing with control. So that's our objective there. Let's see if I can advance the slide. There we go. So we talked about connecting data from different sources, and this is how Sage, this is a small picture of how Sage will connect to various open data sources or research infrastructure sources, such as the SFREs, such as projects like ENVRI, initiatives like the European Environmental Agency, EEA, EMODNet, which is a service of the European Commission, as well as Inspire data and the Copernicus data, the data from Copernicus. Also, ways to access data lakes, which have been discussed quite a bit recently, as well as digital twins such as Destination Earth and the European Digital Twin of the Ocean, EDITO, or also Blue Cloud. So we're including that in the concept. So we have an ability to connect participant data through connectors as well as open data through a lightweight data service wrapper that will allow open and private data to be combined in the correct way. In addition, we don't see the Sage data space or any data space as intending to be a silo. We don't want that to be a silo, and that's actually a concern that we have about some of the architectures that are being proposed is that they do create silos. They are not interoperable. So from the very beginning in Sage, we're designing it with two things to enable interoperability. One is interoperable technology. So this is technical interoperability using standard protocols, ideally, that different data spaces can use, and based on that, to be able to communicate with one another with clarity and with proper intent. And then interestingly, the use of standard formats for governance interoperability. So we can actually allow different data spaces to talk to one another because there's a way to express their relatively or their respective governance using metadata formats that we're working on. We're working with other data spaces to define these. This is a topic in the cross data space interoperability special working group within the Data Spaces Support Center. So this is a topic of interest, and we're trying to move that forward through an approach of governance interoperability. Just to speak about value in the Green Deal data space and how this applies to individual EU countries, individual actors across the European Union. I talked about data sharing groups as a way of interacting within a data space, and this is an example. This is a picture of how a very real situation where we have data being collected at the urban level, at cities and smaller organization areas, at the regional levels, at national levels, across the European Union, and of course for Green Deal, it even applies on a global basis. So the issue is not how do we merge all this data, but how do we in fact respect the different governance that exist at these different layers? So we need a multi-layer reporting capability and we need a multi-layer governance capability to allow this data to coexist and to work correctly back and forth. And the red arrows show how data is being aggregated into a higher level, and then the triangles, which is the symbol for difference or delta, that's showing the flow of information back to the lower level to say, here are the inconsistencies that we found when we merged your data. This is something that happens right now with the Europe's Environmental Agency, EEA. They do a lot of this work, and this is the model that they already implement within EEA, and we want to translate that model into the way the Green Deal data space works. Another example of this is supply chains. So we're often talking about pooling data. Everybody's talking these days about pooling data for AI training. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the use cases that we're working with in the Green Deal data space are supply chain use cases. The text circular economy examples, specifically in textiles, that's the picture I'm showing here. And the eco design sustainability, I forget what it stands for, ESPR, but there are a lot of regulations that basically affect and require the flow of data between participants in a supply chain. And each participant, each, seller and buyer is saying, well, gee, I don't want my data just put into the big pile. I want to control what's going on between my contractual partners. And only to the extent I'm prepared to share or report upstairs to the next layer, maybe the producer responsibility organization, the PRO that's in this diagram, or to some of the national authorities. I'm only going to allow that specifically. We'll obviously encourage them to engage in greater sharing over time as they get more comfortable. But the starting point is first a supply chain buy-sell relationship, and then some higher level reporting within very specific requirements. So this is where the data sharing groups create value in the Green Deal data space, and in turn for enabling a lot of capabilities across data spaces. Another thing that Sage is intended to do is to support regulatory reporting and compliance. So there's a baseline design in Sage that enables key parts of a robust regulatory compliance solution. I won't go through the details here. I will share the slides and you can read them yourselves. This is based on a trust framework that can be extended specifically to support regulatory compliance. It aligns with EIDAS 2, the European Digital Wallet, as well as specific certificate types that we will actually test in Sage for example, the deforestation regulation, the ESPR, Digital Product Passport, traceability, as well as corporate sustainability and reporting disclosures. And then other certificates can be defined as needed, and this would be something that would be managed in a type registry for Sage. Lastly, from a value standpoint, across many countries, member states have to comply with Inspire, which is an EU directive. It's going to be revised. We're offering in this slide some ideas of what directions the Inspire directive will take. This relates to the geospatial data that member states provide and how they can share it as an open data artifact. It's been both successful and unsuccessful. Some things have worked very well. Some things have not worked as well as had been hoped. So the intent is to create a framework with the next version of Inspire that will encourage greater data sharing, greater commonality, greater interoperability. And Sage is planning specifically to be an enabler for these capabilities, which I go through in some detail there. Again, you're welcome to read it in when we share the slides. So a little more detail about how we're building Sage. I'd used this picture before, but this is the complete one. So we have 4 planes. If you're familiar with the world of data spaces, you probably have heard the discussion about control plane and data plane. And the control plane is essentially what the data space itself is doing in terms of managing and implementing the sovereignty of data holders, and making sure that data that is shared or exchanged or being reused is only being done according to the rules set by the original data provider. So that's implemented by functionality in the data space, as well as functionality that sits at each participant's own facilities. So this is the data plane, and the place that connects, the piece of software that connects the data plane at the participant with the data space is the connector. So this is an idea that has been kicking around for a while. Where we are right now is there's good work going on to actually, if you will, take us the last mile with the connector to truly implement the kind of data sovereignty that we would like to see. And in particular, there's a little box inside the connector that says PDEP. That's policy decision point and a policy enforcement point. These are terms from the old XACML model of data exchange and access control mechanisms. But we're referencing this here because that's what's being done. The connector makes decisions about policy relevance in when it's being asked to share data with somebody else, and it also enforces those policies when it has received data from another party with certain rules attached to it. So that's the role there. And the data space itself will implement that. This builds in Sage on two things that we're defining. They will exist in other data spaces. We're being very explicit about it. And that is a governance plane, which is part of the data space. And it's a place where we define the rules of how the data space will work from a governance standpoint. It also talks about things like what metadata standards you will accept. That's a governance question. It's not necessarily a semantic interoperability question. It's a governance question, which standards are appropriate, as well as what kind of trust service providers you'll work with, identity providers, as well as credentials, verified presentations. So these are uh, the components in the governance plane. And then on top, we have an external trust plane. Sage is not intended to run these except in specific instances. In general, we want to rely on external trust service providers, external identity providers, as well as external credential issuers. We don't want to invent all that stuff unless there's a need, unless there's a gap. So what is operated by the data space operator? So Sage will create a data space operator and it will run the data space. It will manage the governance rules. It will manage certain pieces of the control structure. There will be key core control plane services that would be part of the data space, a participant registry, authorization registry, possibly some trust service providing, metadata vocabulary, catalogs, these are things that you've probably heard about. We'll optionally provide data plane services. These can be provided by other players, but Sage is proposing to provide these kind of as an initial offering, an initial capability, because we haven't yet identified all the service providers that we need to fulfill all these requirements, and we don't know exactly what people will need. So we'll step into the gap in the initial period of the development project, but ultimately, this is something we see service providers providing and not Sage itself. So again, the participants operate their own technical systems. These are the blue boxes down here. You can read the details on the right, which is what is in the connector, how the wallets work, how, what you can and cannot do within each of these participant systems in the data plane. Again, the trust plane is mostly outside of the data space. The data space itself, Sage will act as a trust service provider. In some isolated instances, it will act as a trust service provider to identify data space participants as well as the data sharing group memberships. One thing we've focused a lot on is how to implement data access and governance. And there we're working on a machine actionable model for data visibility, access, and reuse, which is gelling in the data space world. And here, our key requirement is that all data space participants will be asked to sign a legal participation agreement. This is not something that is sort of common, but it is well discussed in the context of, for example, the rule book that was originally created by in Finland. I forget which organization. I think VTT has taken it over. It's been adopted by the Data Space Support Center, and it's a good starting point. It's not only a good starting point, but it does establish that legal framework on which everybody will rely. It's nice to have technical systems, but the fact of the matter is, for most companies and organizations that want to participate in any data space, they're going to say, well, where's the agreement? I'm really impressed by all your technology, but it does not satisfy me until I see an agreement. That's what the participation agreement is there for. It establishes that baseline requirement and expectation across all data space participants so that you have the foundation for a trust framework. So in addition, we have the trust plane, so which external trust service providers will be supported. We have a governance plane with a bunch of information. I'll let you read it in terms of how that will operate in a particular data space, but describing it in a common way that can be read by other data spaces. So you have that governance interoperability as a result of that. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the XACML style functions that will live or sit in both the control plane and the data plane. Mostly they'll be implemented for participants in the connector software. And this is where we implement and achieve that data or enterprise sovereignty. So the connector is a key component. Unfortunately, today, the suitable software is not available today. It's something that's only just coming together. There's a lot of good work going on in the Eclipse Data Space Working Group, in which I'm a participant. EGI is a participant. I'm also working with companies like iShare and Microsoft and other contributors to this to put together a robust capability that will be extensible and scalable. So when you have all these pieces in place and you have the data sharing group, well, you are able to achieve the sharing of data between data spaces. So this is an ask, for example. I think I'm getting into some details. I don't know why some of these should be hidden, so I may have to skip some slides. But anyway, these are the dance steps, if you will, for sharing data between two common European data spaces, in this case, SAGE and agriculture, CEADS. Yeah, I'm going to jump past these. So semantic interoperability, very important, obviously, but unfortunately, in the Green Deal world, there are too many domains for us to pick one semantic standard, and that's often the approach being taken in many other data spaces. They're saying, oh, well, they have this big argument at the beginning about what standard to use. We're not having that argument. Instead, we're saying we want to support many of the very good, well documented public standards for a lot of the kinds of domain data that we have. For example, the Open Geospatial Consortium is a very good standard for geospatial data, but not all of our data is geospatial, so we need other things. We also need to allow low compliance data. A lot of what's going on in the Green Deal is to enable participations from small and medium-sized enterprises as well as citizen scientists. So this is a low compliance situation. And we also need to be able to support large data sources, such as ones from Copernicus, that also won't comply with one of our standards. They have their own standards. We have developed a Green Deal information model that was originally developed by a predecessor product called All Data for Green Deal, a Horizon Europe project. So this will provide a good starting point. It includes data quality vocabulary as well as quantities and units. And the vocabulary control will be part of the five-star model. So here we're talking about how to encourage this. In other words, it's a sliding scale. At the top of the scale with 5 stars, highly compliant, conformity assessment of metadata compliance, as well as vocabulary compliance, all the way down to large data formats that have embedded structures but are not really consistent with a metadata format, or unformatted data such as PDFs, text files, CSVs, etc. Generally, you want to motivate the data providers to improve the quality of the data they provide, to get stars, additional stars, if they do a better job of providing better data. We will assess distinct dimensions of the 5-star model. We're working on that now. It intended to be machine evaluated. This is not a human in the loop process. That will take too much time, but we will need compliance assessment tools. Some of these exist. Some of them will need to be produced. In general, what will happen is we'll produce certificates of compliance. So if there is compliance with a particular metadata standard, we can check that, and then we can issue a verified credential that can show that a certain standard, the OGC standard, is being complied with. I'll skip on in the interest of time. So there will be a number of value-added services. I mentioned these in the data plane: format transformation, compliance assessment I just mentioned, semantic uplift, in other words, get more stars, how to securely process data. This is about processing it according to the rules of the data provider. Simply having cybersecurity is just one part of that. There are other pieces to that. Various harmonization and aggregation services. We have lots of data. Several use cases in Sage are what I call big piles of data. So harmonization is key, but it's not something that individual clients can do because the data is very big. So a couple other examples showing there included trusted reporting, which I mentioned earlier. So data sharing groups in Sage, I'll move quickly through this. I showed you this before. Again, I showed you this. These are motivators. These real world use cases are motivators for us to automate this idea of a data sharing group and to use it as a way of managing access to data. We have, in general, the it also supports value creation because often the way you do this in the real world, yes, there's a lot of talk about data monetization, but the way that really works is that you have to be prepared to widely share your data and then create a payment structure. More common and more realistic in the initial time is a more limited reuse within a group, what economists call club goods. So you can look at Wikipedia for a definition there. Basically, creating an asset that can be shared with a small group of people will define the group to control the access, will mint a credential to manage that access, and then this also aligns with discussions about data space trust frameworks that are going on in the Eclipse Data Space Working Group, Gaia X, ISO SC38, virtual organizations and research. So this is a sort of well-established pattern, but it's really not being fully exploited in the data space world, and that's why we're pushing this in Sage as a starting point. So some of the challenges that we have, I haven't written them all down. I've kind of alluded to it from a technical standpoint. One of the issues is creating the kinds of connectors that will implement the data sovereignty activity that we're talking about. These really do not exist today. Many data spaces, even the common European data spaces out there, in order for them to work, for connectors to talk to other connectors, people have found that they have to basically mandate what connector to use. So connector A will talk to connector A, will talk to connector A, but you can't just put in a bunch of connectors because they don't interoperate. They don't behave in the same way. And what we want is an ability to say you can use any compliant connector using the configurable resources that are defined by the Eclipse Data Space Working Group. And then you can be assured that they will operate the same way, even if different providers are giving them to you or selling them to you or providing them as a service. So that's one example. Governance is another area, and I've mentioned already the need to create some of these governance frameworks. There's work to define it. We're pushing very hard for machine actionable governance, not only at the data space level, but also across data sharing groups, and also for individual data holders to have a way to describe in a common way access rights for their data so that it's visible and accessible not only within the data space, but also to other parts of the world, other data spaces, other data sharing initiatives. So this should not be something where the semantics of access are limited to the data space you're in. We want this to be interoperable, and that's a governance challenge. Legal is an it may be getting better, but right now the current laws, for example, the Data Governance Act, requires that any data intermediary service should be operated by a separate, independent legal entity. And that's a very difficult requirement. It's very complicated in Sage because it would mean we'd probably have, dozens of these individual legal entities potentially, depending on how the law is being interpreted. The data union strategy was announced just a few days ago. It has some very promising language about by the end of this year, Q4 2025, a harmonization and an alignment, kind of an omnibus bill for data spaces, for data sharing, that will address some of these challenges, make it easier to do data intermediation without necessarily having to create a bunch of legal entities for that. The other thing that was very interesting is they announced and released a number of model contracts for data sharing, contracts between party A and party B that would hopefully work across the EU. Right now, most people, most legal scholars will tell you, well, you need to write an agreement that is appropriate for Ireland, or Ireland going to Belgium and a different one for Belgium going to Ireland, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a bit of a complexity there. And these model contracts offer some hope that we'll have a consistent legal basis that we can rely on for transactions across the data space, across the Green Deal data space, which by definition is going to be multi-country. It's not going to be a situation where we're mostly working within one or two countries. The other area that we need to work on is this participation agreement. I don't know what hints that the work of the Commission will provide in this area, but I think once we have a clear model contract for data sharing, I think it'll be easier to write a participation agreement. And once we have the data intermediation issues sorted out, this will also make it easier for us to figure out what the legal structure of the data space operator might be, what will be run by the data space operator, what legal entity should there be, where should it be located, what form should it take. And these have been open questions for years, and I think we're getting a little closer. We're not quite figured it out. So that's an open issue. Within Sage, we don't expect to actually create these legal entities until nearer to the end of the project, early, let's say late 2027. We may be able to do it earlier if it makes sense, if we have clarity about the direction. But right now, I'm not sure we see clarity. So we will continue to operate as a project, and hopefully we'll get to the point where we can create the right kind of entities to act as operators and the ongoing sustainable activity of the Green Deal. And that's all from me. And that's my contact information. I do work through my own company, Bloodstone Consulting. I have been involved to a great deal with EGI over time. But in Sage, I'm working primarily through Bloodstone as my company in providing the technical coordination services. So I'll stop sharing.
That's
Thank you.
fantastic. Thank you, Mark. Very comprehensive.
Carmeliana, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying thank you, Mark. That was very comprehensive. There's quite a bit of detail there. I had just one question, and forgive me if it's a bit naive, but you showed the Sage data space, and obviously it's quite complex because it's spanning across European countries, and it's also you want the Sage to talk to other European data spaces. But would you say is there a minimum viable data space if you wanted to create a more local data space in your own ecosystem, like as a test bed? Would there be kind of like a minimum viable what's required to create a data space that could then maybe be scaled up?
Well, I think the last phrase is the problem phrase. There are plenty of sort of examples of things that there are for-profit providers of data space services reselling the simple minimum viable product. There's the simple product itself. There are other capabilities from other providers. The issue that I have with all of those is that they aren't scalable because scalability requires us to solve some of these interoperability problems that I've been talking about, as well as interoperability amongst connectors. It's possible to say, okay, well, we're going to do a little starter. Everybody's going to install the TNO connector or the University of Galway connector or the EDC connector that is available from the repository on Eclipse. But the challenge is, well, what if I want to start mixing connectors? What if I want to define my own rules? What if I want to make sure that the rules work across different areas and different groups of users within my ecosystem? How do I define those rules? These are the things that I have found people are getting hung up on. And yes, you can get started, but it doesn't scale. You basically have to blow it up and start over again at this point. So we have not made any decisions at this moment about what components we will use because we are holding off until we have answers to the questions of how to achieve that semantic and governance interoperability so that when we do start installing software, we're not going to have to throw it out after 6 months. I mean, may have to do that anyway, just as a matter of software development. It's kind of an inevitable that you make mistakes and you want to do it better almost immediately. But from our perspective, we see these as real issues to scalability down the road. So my personal feeling is that if your expectation is to scale beyond that ecosystem, if you think you're going to want to share data outside of that ecosystem or bring data in from another ecosystem, then it's worth having a conversation about what the design is. I don't see this as something that's going to hold us up for a long time, but I don't think the minimum viable scalable product that's out that people will want exists today. And this is something I've been complaining about for a while. So it's not new. It's not news for me. It may not be the story you want to hear, but
No, 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 that's a fair answer. Thanks, Mark. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? We have a few minutes. Rafiq, Asif?
I was just thinking if our audiences have any question or not.
No, nobody has put any up.
Yeah,
Hold on.
I think Asif has a quick question. So basically, what could be the first concrete step to participate in the data space for any startup? That's the question mark for you.
Um, so one of the things that we expect to happen in the next few months is we expect to see a new version of the Eclipse, actually several versions of the Eclipse Data Space Connector being released and made available. The and they will support not only, say, a large enterprise that's prepared to install a connector on its own premises and connect to its own technical infrastructure, but these can also be set up as multi-tenant systems that might be operated by an ISP or by an IT provider, and they could make this available to their clients so that you could have, six SMEs essentially living in the same software system, but paying a smaller amount because it's being done in a very efficient way by an IT provider of some sort, meaning that the SME doesn't have to install the software themselves, doesn't need to have their own cloud system or on-premises system onto which they would install this stuff. They could work with their vendors that they're working with, their IT vendors that they have right now, and say, would you add this, please, or connect me to this capability? So this is something that's being actively worked on right now. And what I'm hearing, and I'm kind of relying on it, is that there will be something to show for this by the year end, by 2020, end of 2025. So within a couple of months, we'll begin to see code that can be deployed in this way. There'll be an even more loose version of this where there would be, say, a bunch of, I'll use the word office in a very generic way, not in a branded way from some companies, but imagine you have a bunch of sort of productivity applications. The idea would be, and it's being run on a cloud provider of some sort, you would be able to connect that to a version of the Eclipse Data Space Connector that would allow you as a user in this productivity, online productivity capability, an office suite type of thing, to be able to connect to the connector and expose your data to a data space, to multiple data spaces. That's another thing, being able to say, I want to connect to A and B and C with this data, as opposed to having three separate connectors for three separate data spaces. It'll allow that kind of multi connectivity for a much smaller organization. Literally a one-person company could hook into this and make it available with the right kind of connection. So I see that as very promising. I see it as around the corner. Within Sage, we propose that we would try to test this and even to offer some results of our testing as early as the Data Space Symposium, which is in February. So we hope to be able to see some results. So I see another question. How do you foresee this infrastructure going to mature in coming years, let's say over 5 years? I think we're at the point where we need to get a much more production mentality with this software. We need to be in a situation where people are managing the data spaces as a production environment with release management. You don't just change stuff around. It's a very managed process. Within Sage, we have a service management system that will be implemented. We have a help desk. We have all kinds of stuff that we're planning to implement so that Sage is a partner to companies and can be relied upon not to make a bunch of changes as if it was a project, as if it was an experiment. Instead, we want to be a reliable service that some money might be paid for, and in turn is not going to have to change, have to be reinstalled every 10 days. Instead, it's going to be something where new releases would be rolled out and released remotely, updated remotely, and ideally customers are not having to deal with that. So that's what, to me, what maturity looks like. I think we're a little bit far from that. We're probably a year and a half from from being in that mode. But I'd say for Sage, we want to achieve that in about a year and a half. And to us, we would like to say that would be the kind of model that other people should adapt and adopt to over the coming years. Last comment in the chat was, are these challenges common across all EU data spaces? Kind of to Carmen's comment originally, yes, you can start with you can ignore some of these challenges by saying I'm going to deal with just a very specific use case. But the immediate question that people are going to ask is, oh, I put my data in for this, and now I'd like to share it for that. How do I do that? It's a different data space, it's a different format, there are different rules. How do I manage that? Or do I have to copy the data over here and make it available through some entirely separate thing? To me, that's a big hurdle for data spaces or for customers. They're saying, look, I don't want to have to do that. I want to put it in. The once only principle should apply to data spaces as well. So I think that's something we need to make possible. So these challenges are common. They may not be front of mind for most people, but I think if you're looking at the kinds of benefits that we're talking about, in terms of benefits to countries, benefits to companies, we need to solve these challenges. They do exist in other areas. There may be more limited groups of people who need certain kinds of data, but eventually somebody's going to say, oh, gee, it would be nice to connect data A and data B, or make data A available to three different data spaces because they all want it. How do we do that? And rather than make that a very complicated process, it's something that should be contemplated from the very beginning. So that's my quickish answer to that.
So can we assume then, Mark, there's no kind of roundtable between the different EU data spaces to monitor or manage where you are in terms of constructing or building out these data spaces?
This doesn't exist right now, and I've been agitating for that. So we're trying to set up a meeting of the people with dirty hands, with
The
mud,
dirt onto the nails, yeah.
dirt under the nails. So that's the proof. Show me your dirty fingers.
Yeah.
And that's what I want, is a conversation with these people to say, yeah, we need to get this stuff working, and how are you doing it, and how are you doing it, etc.
It would make sense, yeah, when it's so new in the, well, I suppose not new, but if it's still fairly
Yeah.
in its infancy, that it's all, able to talk to each other, a common language, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, cool. Mark, thanks so much for your time. It was enjoyable.
Thank you. As I said, I will provide the slide deck, and you're free to share that with your group. Thanks very
Yeah,
much.
if you want to send it, yeah, a revised deck, that'd be super, yeah. Rafiq, do you have any closing words?
No, I'd like to thank you, Mark, for your time. I know you are very busy. We all know you are very busy. So it's a really, really great discussion that we had, particularly, like that how Sage is being implemented. And it's a kind of like experience that we want to share with our Irish, like potential stakeholders and the users of data spaces. Our main purpose of this, particularly the organizing this DSEI webinar, is basically to increase awareness within, like within Ireland, because we know for the fact that we have a lot of data in Ireland, and we also did, a study by ourselves within Insight, being a part of DSSC project. We are very close collaborator of DSSC project. We had also a local project with that was funded by SEI, which is the Environment and Energy Organization, funding organization in Ireland. Also was Department of Transport was involved in that. So we have a really strong sort of like an understanding of one challenge here in Ireland is that data sharing is big problem here. Like that's perhaps like that's not all the people are saying it out loud, but we felt it, and we identified it, and sort of like we found various challenges regarding this. So what we wanted to do is basically to increase that awareness to the people, is that look, data sharing is not a bad thing. It has a loads of facilities and advantages. As Mark, you pointed out, that the organization will realize that it's more advantageous than than the privacy issue. And privacy issue can be solved It's
Right.
not something a rocket science. It can be solved with a proper contract, and we have these different regulatory frameworks as well. But that's the thing, and also, like, we're looking forward, within Insight and University of Galway, we're trying to set up a kind of like a sandbox environment for, like, at least for the user to test it, and a sort of like, get a feeling that what exactly the data sharing is, that how they can get advantages. So thanks again a lot, Mark, and it was an honor to have you here as a speaker with us, and thank you very much for sharing all the experience that you had with Sedge.
Well,
And
thank you very much. Let me just make one quick comment to your statement. You mentioned that there's some discussion of how environmental, energy, transport, et cetera, might take advantage of data spaces.
yeah,
Our hope in Sage is that in the initial stages, we will be supporting our use cases. But our hope is that fairly soon, let's say by the end of next year, we would be in a position to start opening up to additional use cases, additional people using the same infrastructure. We would create a separate data sharing group for, the Irish Energy Board or something like that, just to make something up off my head and say,
perfect,
hey, we can do this. It would still be a sandbox kind of capability, but it would
perfect,
explore how to be part of a bigger data space while at the same time having control of your data within your own community or group. So
perfect.
I hope we can discuss that.
Yeah, that
In,
I think that's a great idea. I believe, like, that would be really, really sort of like, very much, let's say, that starting point for the people here in Ireland who are working in the Grindle area, who are dealing with the Grindle area. We have a one, let's say that, I mean, this is the thing that DSAI want to. This is a very new initiative, right? So we just started, within University of Galway. This is what we want to do. We want to connect the people with the European data spaces,
right.
share the idea. So I think, like, this would be a great idea, that how Sage can connect this Grindle community here in Ireland, as the guys come here and share your data, and it's very safe. It's within your control, and you can share even locally among yourselves. So that's basically, like, the journey we want to have.
Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
thank you
Okay,
very much.
Mark, we might see you in Galway next September for EBDVF
Yeah.
2026. We're hosted in Galway next year, so I always
Okay,
get
I
my
look forward to
consonants
it.
all mixed up there. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I
Yeah.
look
Thank you,
forward
Mark,
to
and
it.
thank you everyone for joining today.
Yes, and all our attendees as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Cheers.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.